is CNN Breaking News.
Hello, I'm Wolf Blitzer. It's 1 p.m. here in Washington, 8 p.m. in Jerusalem, 9 p.m. in Moscow, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thanks very much for joining us. Franken out. The Minnesota Democrat resigning from the U.S. Senate, but denying allegations of harassment and taking shots at the same time at the president. Donald Trump Jr. refusing to answer questions about his conversations with the president involving Russia, and his reason is being called bogus by both lawmakers and legal experts. And as the world condemns the president's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, violent protests erupt and Arab leaders warn of more to come. But let's start with Minnesota Senator Al Franken stepping down under a lot of pressure. More than half of all of his Senate Democratic colleagues called on him to resign over allegations of sexual harassment. And today, he answered those calls from the Senate floor.
Serving in the United States Senate has been the great honor of my life. I know in my heart that nothing I have done as a senator, nothing, has brought this honor on this institution. And I am confident that the Ethics Committee would agree. Nevertheless, today I am announcing that in the coming weeks, I will be resigning as a member of the United States Senate. I, of all people, am aware that there is some irony in the fact that I am leaving while a man who has bragged on tape about his history of sexual assault sits in the Oval Office, and a man who has repeatedly preyed on young girls campaigns for the Senate with the full support of his party.
CNN national politics reporter MJ Lee is up on Capitol Hill for us. So MJ, so far, what's been the reaction to Senator Franken's decision?
Well, Wolf, this was certainly a defiant speech from Senator Franken. Yes, he did say that he was resigning, but it was clear, and he made it clear, that he regrets having been put in this position and the fact that he now has to leave office. One of the most remarkable moments from that speech, Wolf, was when he addressed the women who have made allegations of sexual harassment against him. He went as far as to say that some of the allegations were not actually true. Take a listen to what he said about these women and the allegations that were leveled against him in the last couple of weeks.
Over the last few weeks, a number of women have come forward to talk about how they felt my actions had affected them. I was shocked. I was upset. But in responding to their claims, I also wanted to be respectful of that broader conversation, because all women deserve to be heard and their experiences taken seriously. I think that was the right thing to do. I also think it gave some people the false impression that I was admitting to doing things that, in fact, I haven't done. Some of the allegations against me are simply not true. Others I remember very differently.
I should note, Wolf, that he did not apologize to either one of the women or any of the women who have made allegations against him in recent weeks. More than half a dozen women have come out to say that he behaved inappropriately over the years. One of those women, Wolf, was Lindsay Menz. She told CNN a little while ago, some days ago, that Senator Franken had touched her inappropriately in 2010 at the Minnesota State Fair. I just got off the phone with her, and Menz tells me that she was a little disappointed having watched Franken's speech, that she felt like he was continuing to dismiss some of these allegations, but that she also felt sad to see him resign from a job that she believes he is very passionate about. And finally, of course, this has been a very hard day for some of Franken's colleagues here in the Senate who did not want to see this happen and who would not have guessed that this was a position that Franken would find himself in.
So what's next for his Senate seat? Where do we go from here?
Well, now that the resignation is official, we are going to see a political domino effect in the state of Minnesota. First, the governor, Mark Dayton there, the Democratic governor in the state, will have to make an appointment to fill that vacancy. Some of the names that are being thrown around include Democratic Congressman Keith Ellison, Tim Walz. Another name that has been thrown around a lot is the Lieutenant Governor Tina Smith, who once served as Dayton's chief of staff. And after that appointment is made, of course, in 2018, there will be another election to fill that seat that Franken has vacated and will be temporarily filled by somebody else. This means that Republicans could try to make a play for that seat. Some of the names that are being thrown around on that front is former Governor Tim Pawlenty, as well as former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, who also ran for president. For the time being, the governor is saying that he will make a decision in the next couple of days, but that he has not made that decision yet. Wolf.
I'm Jay Lee up on Capitol Hill. Thanks very much. Senator Franken becomes just the second sitting senator to resign over ethics issues over the past 2 decades. Let's bring in A.B. Stoddard, associate editor, columnist for Real Clear Politics, and CNN's chief political analyst, Gloria Borger. What did you think of his floor speech, Gloria?
I think he was angry and trying to hide it in a funny way. The undercurrent to the speech to me was, I'm taking one for the team. Because he didn't admit guilt in any way. He didn't apologize in any way. He praised the United States Senate in a very gracious way and talked about how it had been an honor to serve. But he went out of his way also to talk about the irony in the fact that while he had to go, without mentioning names, Donald Trump was still in the Oval Office and Roy Moore was supported by the Republican Party without mentioning their names. So there was, this undercurrent of, I'm the sacrificial lamb here for the Democratic Party, which in many ways he is.
How did you see that, A.B.?
I agree with Gloria. He seemed aggrieved that, and a bit defiant. He actually changed his changed course, I thought, a bit from what was more contrition and admission initially to these many stories that are similar of him grabbing women's buttocks at the state fair. And he says things like, I'm a warm person and I'm a hugger. And the story yesterday, the anecdote was just absolutely awful and apparently was sort of the last straw, at least for the women senators who had contemplated what to do with this this coming scandal. What they continued to be asked what should happen to Senator Franken. He's a good senator. He's a prodigious fundraiser. It was very tough for the party to get rid of him, but they've clearly made up their minds that this is conduct that cannot be defended. And what is an ethics committee investigation? They're going to go back to the state fair and start picking people. I mean, it's a very difficult process, but he changed channels today and decided, I'm not going to drown in shame today. I'm going to leave and I'm going to let him have it a little bit on the way out.
Were you surprised how quickly it developed yesterday? Almost all of the Democratic women senators saying he must go, sure. And then a whole bunch of his male colleagues said he must go as well. It really spiraled. Yeah,
our colleague Ashley Killow has done a great piece on this, and I think that there have been conversations going on, particularly among the women in the Senate. And then I think that as the stories kept coming, there was sort of a point where they said this can't go on anymore. I would argue that perhaps they should have done it sooner, because if you want to occupy the moral high ground, perhaps it shouldn't take you 3 weeks to get there, because obviously this is also a political decision, and it is about putting the Republicans on the defensive here about Roy Moore. But what was stunning to me, as somebody who covered Capitol Hill for a very long time and covered Capitol Hill when the big debate among women was, would you be able to wear pants on the Senate floor, was that the women had the power and the authority. And once they got together, there was sort of no stopping this thing as it unfolded.
The former Bush White House press secretary, Ari Fleischer, he had an interesting tweet that he just posted. Let me put it up on the screen. I'll read it. Franken should not have resigned. His fate should have been left to the people of Minnesota. Moore, who had sexual contact with a 14-year-old, should drop out. Conyers, who hit on his employees, should have resigned. Franken is a creep who acted inappropriately, but his facts are different. AB, your reaction?
You know, it's a new landscape. In a way, he likely did take one for the team, but in other ways, his conduct before being in office is being judged as inappropriate and unacceptable. At the end of the day, he made the case that it was the people of Minnesota that he could no longer properly serve. He was actually saying it is up to Minnesota and not the Democratic Party and my colleagues here in this chamber. And I see as a public servant that I can no longer effectively serve them.
Both of you stand by. There's more to discuss. But I want to get to the Russia investigation right now. Donald Trump Jr.'s refusal to discuss a key conversation with his father. The younger Trump would not reveal what he and the president discussed after reports surfaced about the infamous Trump Tower meeting in New York City back in June of 2016. Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, he's the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, says Donald Trump Jr. cited attorney-client privilege. Listen.
He invoked a privilege, and we made it clear, at least on our side of the aisle, that we did not think this was a recognizable privilege. He then, in his counsel, said they would go back and discuss it further with their lawyers, with the president's lawyers, and get back to us. The question comes, if they get back to us and say, no, we're not going to answer those questions, then we'll be required to subpoena Donald Trump Jr. back before the committee.
Let's bring in our justice correspondent, Jessica Schneider, who's been following this story for us. Jessica, so what's the reaction to Donald Trump Jr.'s claim of attorney-client privilege?
Well, quite simply, Wolf, Democrats are saying it doesn't stand on firm legal footing. In particular, top Democrat Adam Schiff says you cannot shield communications merely because an attorney is present for those conversations. Instead, the privilege is designed to protect communications exclusively between the attorney and the client. But nevertheless, that was the privilege that Donald Trump Jr. invoked in front of the committee Wednesday. He would not tell congressional investigators what he and his father, President Trump, discussed this past summer after reports surfaced about that June 2016 meeting at Trump Tower with a Russian lawyer. Now, Trump Jr. did say that he spoke with current White House Communications Director Hope Hicks about how to respond to the reports. Trump Jr. also said that the president was debating whether to release a longer or shorter statement while on board Air Force One with Hope Hicks. And as you'll recall, that initial statement, it gave a misleading impression of the meeting, saying it was just about adoptions. But of course, a later statement acknowledged that Trump Jr. was promised dirt on Hillary Clinton. And when the reports first came out, though, the president's lawyers denied that he was involved in any way in drafting that initial statement.
Let me say this. The president, but I do want to be clear that the president was not involved in the drafting of the statement and did not issue the statement.
Now, after that statement, the White House did eventually acknowledge that the president did weigh in on the statement. He offered suggestions, and Sarah Sanders at the time described it as something, quote, any father would do. Wolf, that June 2016 meeting, it has become a big investigative focal point, both for Congress and the special counsel. Wolf?
Jessica Schneider reporting for us. Jessica, thanks very much. Let's get some more perspective on Donald Trump Jr.'s testimony before the House Intelligence Committee and his claim of attorney-client privilege. Democratic Congresswoman Jackie Speier of California is a key member of the Intelligence Committee. She's joining us now from Capitol Hill. I assume you were there for those 7 or 8 hours of his questioning yesterday, right, Congresswoman?
I sure was, yes.
So what's your reaction to Donald Trump Jr. invoking what's called attorney-client privilege to avoid answering anything about his conversation with his father?
I think that it was a Hail Mary pass. I think they have succeeded for the moment. I don't think it holds any water. And as you have pointed out, it is in fact a privilege that exists between the client and the attorney, not between the father and the son. And it's a critical question that needs to be answered about what that conversation was about almost a year after the actual meeting took place. And I do believe that the president has been not forthcoming. He first said one thing, then says another. He clearly weighed in a very significant way in what that statement was going to say and how it was framed.
What if he would have cited executive privilege, a private conversation with the President of the United States, instead of attorney-client privilege? Would he have been on better ground?
So the executive privilege can only be invoked by the executive. It can't be invoked by the executive's son in this case. This is also about, conduct that took place before he was president. Certainly the meeting or the conversation that took place after he was president is one that, arguably he might be able to assert executive privilege, but the president did not, and so I don't believe that Donald Jr. can invoke it.
Donald Trump Jr. also says he spoke with the senior White House aide Hope Hicks about responding to the reports on the Trump Tower meeting. Hicks is now the White House communications director, as you know. Does this put her in a vulnerable position?
Well, I do believe that she has been called by the special counsel, at least those are the public reports that we've heard, and she has a very privileged position working with the president, probably privy to many meetings and conversations that most people are not. So it will be interesting to find out to what extent her testimony would suggest that there's obstruction of justice.
What questions do you want Donald Trump Jr. to respond to that he didn't answer during those 7 or 8 hours of questioning yesterday? Are there other examples that you want him to answer?
Well, there certainly is a lack of clarity on many issues because he either didn't recall or did not know. And it was surprising to me that as the executive vice president or senior vice president of the Trump organization, he was unaware of the relationships that the Trump organization had as a company with many Russians in business activities. And part of what we're looking here is how did Russia infiltrate so much of what is going on in this country, whether it was the election system, whether it was the actual campaign process, or whether it was creating a relationship with a potential president that would allow them to have undue influence in terms of many international issues.
The ranking member of your committee, the Intelligence Committee, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, also says he's beginning to see pieces of the puzzle fall into place in terms of what's described as possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia or obstruction of justice. Do you see the dots being connected right now?
I do think that the obstruction of justice case is one that will be made by the special counsel, Bob Mueller. But beyond that, in terms of whether there was coordination, it certainly looks like there was conversations, whether they were direct messaging or other forms of communication that took place, particularly between WikiLeaks and the campaign. And WikiLeaks became the vehicle through which the Russians were trying to influence the campaign, I believe.
Yeah, releasing all those emails that had been hacked. Let's switch gears for a moment while I have you, Congressman. Talk about the dramatic announcement today by Senator Al Franken that he's resigning over these sexual harassment accusations. What's your reaction?
Well, it's a very sad day. It's a sad day because I think Senator Franken was doing an outstanding job as a senator. Unfortunately, his conduct before becoming a member of the Senate was really inappropriate on a number of levels. And we say zero tolerance for sexual harassment in the halls of Congress, and we have got to stand up for that principle for all the women that work here.
In his speech, he took a couple swipes right at President Trump as well as Roy Moore, the Republican candidate for Senate in Alabama. Let me play the clip. Listen to this.
I, of all people, am aware that there is some irony in the fact that I am leaving while a man who has bragged on tape about his history of sexual assault sits in the Oval Office, and a man who has repeatedly preyed on young girls campaigns for the Senate with the full support of his party.
So are Democrats now trying to seize the moral high ground with this late development?
Well, the statement by the senator is very accurate. We do have a president who, if he were running for office this year, would not get elected because the sexual harassment issue has hit a peak in terms of recognition that this is our moment as women throughout the country to protect women in the workplace. And we are not going to let this moment pass. As for Roy Moore, I think there's a huge issue that the Senate's going to have to take up if he is elected, and I'm not certain he will be elected, but if he's elected, because expulsion has to be considered. That person has lied over and over again. He clearly has indicated that he engaged with young women when he was much older and they were underage, and I would suggest that that is something that needs to be investigated. But
you think Senator Franken did the right thing by resigning today?
I think it was a very hard decision for him, but I think he did it really, on behalf of the institution. And he recognized that it was going to be very difficult for him to continue to serve. So he did do the right thing.
All right, Congresswoman Jackie Speer, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Just moments from now, the White House answering questions on all of this and a whole lot more. We're standing by for the White House press briefing with Sarah Sanders. We'll have live coverage of that. Also, protests erupt after the president declares Jerusalem the capital of Israel. And now the leader of Hezbollah says Christian and Muslim holy sites are in danger. We'll go there live. And breaking now, the FBI director rebuking President Trump's harsh attacks on the agency and commenting on concerns of interference in the Robert Mueller special counsel investigation. Now it's in its fourth hour up on Capitol Hill. You're looking at live pictures. The new head of the FBI, Christopher Wray, is defending his agency in front of the House Judiciary Committee. Wray was questioned about an insulting tweet from the president saying the FBI's reputation was now, in quote, tatters and the worst in history. The president was referring to reports about a possible bias from a former top bureau official. Wray responded completely unfazed.
There is no shortage of opinions out there. What I can tell you is that the FBI that I see is tens of thousands of agents and analysts and staff working their tails off to keep Americans safe from the next terrorist attack. The FBI that I see is respected and appreciated by our partners in federal, state, and local law enforcement, in the intelligence community, by our foreign counterparts, both law enforcement and national security, in something like 200 countries around the globe.
Let's bring back our panel, A.B. Stoddard and Gloria Borger. He's been on the job now for 4 months. Christopher Wray, how do you think he did today in responding to the presidential tweet?
I think he did very well, and I think he defended the FBI as he should. And I think he made it very clear that while there are lots of opinions out there, what he sees from his vantage point are people who are dedicated to keeping this country safe. And I think that he spoke very clearly and very strongly without mentioning the president, as you would expect.
Why does the president, since taking office, President Trump, he slammed the FBI, as we just heard in that tweet, but earlier he slammed the intelligence community as well. Why do you think he does that?
He did that in December before he was even president. I think in his mind, this is all connected to Russia. So he likes to say they were wrong on WMD in Iraq and go back to, some criticisms that predate his service. But I think all roads usually lead back in this criticism on these institutions to intelligence investigations into what Russia did in our election in 2016 in the campaign, and he takes it personally and makes him defensive, and he attacks. And I think this, we knew what Christopher Wray would say today, but I think it's remarkable that Attorney General Sessions has stood silent as the director of that department, the top cop in the country, while the president attacks the FBI. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, certainly is. All right, guys, thanks so much. There's a lot going on, Gloria and A.B. So how will the White House react to Senator Al Franken calling out President Trump during his resignation speech on the Senate floor? We'll go there live. The White House briefing is getting ready to begin. Plus, an ominous warning from Hezbollah saying Christian and Muslim holy sites are now in danger after President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. Stay with us. Angry backlash from across much of the Middle East after President Trump's dramatic decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. This is the scene, by the way, in the West Bank. Crowds of protesters, rock throwing, huge clouds of smoke earlier in the day. The Palestinian group Hamas calling for a new uprising, and the leaders of the Islamic Jihad of Palestine saying it is ready for a new armed struggle. The Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah slamming President Trump, saying the decision puts Christian and Muslim holy places, especially the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, in danger. The State Department here in Washington updating its worldwide caution. Areas of the Middle East are now of particular importance given the unrest in the region. Let's go to our correspondent Ian Lee. He's joining us from Ramallah, where the protests have turned violent, at least earlier in the day. Also joining us, by the way, our CNN military and diplomatic analyst, retired Rear Admiral John Kirby, served as the State Department spokesman and the Pentagon press secretary as well. Ian, first of all, to you, as you know, Palestinian leaders, at least some of them, have called for 3 days of rage. So tell our viewers what has been going on during the course of today. It's about 8:30 p.m. your time.
Well, Wolf, about 8 hours ago, we had protesters gather in the square behind me. This is the central square in Ramallah called El Manara. They came out, they protested, and then they started going in that direction, and that goes towards an Israeli checkpoint. And that's where we went, and that's where we saw the fiercest clashes today. You had thousands of people there, Wolf, Palestinians squaring off with the Israeli military, the Palestinians throwing rocks, they had slingshots. They were lighting tires on fire. The Israeli military, the soldiers responding with tear gas and rubber bullets. That pitched battle went on for hours and hours. It ebbed and flowed as the protesters kept moving forward. Then the Israelis would unleash a cloud of tear gas, pushing everyone back. And we saw ambulance after ambulance taking people who have been injured. And we saw injuries of people who'd been shot with rubber bullets in the arms, people hit in the head, and a lot of blood. And this is really that anger and frustration that Arab leaders were warning about, a lot of world leaders were warning about, that could happen when President Trump made that announcement of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. You know, when you talk to protesters, the one thing they said is, of course they're angry at Trump, of course they're angry at Israel, but they're also frustrated with their own leaders because they don't feel that there's any path forward. And that's what we're seeing, Wolf. We're seeing the street right now speak the loudest.
Stand by. I want to bring John Kirby into this as well, John. As you know, some White House officials are already acknowledging they expected, at least on a temporary basis, this kind of setback to the peace process. So where does the administration go from here?
Well, look, it's going to set back any effective peace process for many months. If it can never be repaired, it may not be repairable. Look, I think they realized it wasn't going very far, and so the president made a domestic calculation to fulfill this campaign promise. But he has definitely set back any hopes of getting the peace process on track. He's also, I think, put another nail in the coffin of U.S. credibility overseas, because we're not going to be seen, no matter what path is forward, no matter what chance they have going forward, the United States is not going to be seen as a credible, reliable arbiter of this process going forward, and that's a real shame.
Ian, a lot of people are worried, I'm sure you are, a lot of other folks, tomorrow, Friday, being a holy day for Muslims, and there's a lot of anticipation there could be even more violence. What are you hearing? What do you anticipate?
You know, you bring up a good point, because today is Thursday, and this isn't a day you typically have protests and violence. In the area we went to, you know, from time to time we'll have protests, but not at this scale. It was large-scale protests. And you're right, Friday is a day in the Arab world where people go out and protest, air their grievances after midday Friday prayer. And we're expecting more of what we saw today. You know, this wasn't just here in Ramallah, but we're hearing there were protests in Bethlehem, and tomorrow we're expecting large protests in Ramallah, in Bethlehem, in Jerusalem, all over the West Bank. As people really go out and air their grievances, their frustrations. We know the U.S. Embassy has warned people to stay away from any sort of large gatherings. Their diplomats have to stay out of the West Bank and the Old City. A real tense situation as we move forward. But really, Wolf, we're in uncharted waters. Really, no one knows where this is going to go, how it's going to end, and what's really going to happen.
Be careful over there. Ian Lee in Ramallah for us on the West Bank. John Kirby is here in Washington with me. We'll stay on top of this story. There's other news we're following, including the dramatic statement from Senator Al Franken taking some parting shots at both President Trump and Roy Moore during his resignation speech on the Senate floor. You're looking at live pictures from the White House briefing room. We expect the White House press secretary, Sarah Sanders, to come in momentarily, start answering reporters' questions. Plus, take two, Senators Chuck Schumer and Representative Nancy Pelosi issuing a threat to the president just ahead of their meeting later this afternoon at the White House. We have new information. We'll update you right when we come back. All right, let's go to the White House right now. Sarah Sanders beginning the press briefing.
Reflection across our nation as we remember the date which will live in infamy, when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. As the president said in a stirring video released earlier today, we remember the lives that were lost, the families torn from loved ones, and the heroes who rose to America's defense. The president will be meeting with members who served at Pearl Harbor later today, as you all know. Also, as you're aware, the president will meet later this afternoon with congressional leaders from both parties to discuss the need to fund the government, particularly our military and the Department of Veterans Affairs. The president and the Republicans in the House and Senate are eager to pass a bill fully funding the federal government and the military. With the threats we are facing, our national security should not be held hostage for irresponsible demands, and we certainly hope that won't happen. Now, with Christmas season in full swing, I want to shine a spotlight on some of the incredible stories of generosity and love that show what the Christmas spirit and the American spirit are all about. Today, I'd like to start with the story of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in Wheeling, West Virginia. The story starts over 100 years ago when a young girl tragically died around the Christmas season, and her family donated money to the church in her honor and asked that the money be used for children at Christmas. What they may not have realized at the time was that this act of kindness in the midst of incredible heartache would bless countless children for the next century. To this day, St. Matthew's continues helping children and families during the Christmas season. They usually do it anonymously, but word of their generosity spread through social media this year. At the local Walmart, numerous families will come to pay the bill for Christmas toys they'd put on layaway and be told that there's no need because it's already been paid in full. There will be so many acts of generosity and kindness that go unnoticed this Christmas season, and that's okay. St. Matthew's Church wasn't looking for credit, and neither are so many others. But these stories are important because they remind us what this season is all about, and that's the greatest gift of all, that a Savior was born. And hopefully we can all focus and take time out of our busy schedules to enjoy the Christmas season or however you may celebrate. And with that, I'll take your questions. Kevin.
Thank you, sir. I want to ask you about the possible government shutdown and the optimism that the president might have that he can avert a shutdown. And if I could follow up and ask about the California fires and the very latest that the White House has on that.
Sure. In terms of the government shutdown, look, we expect a clean CR to pass with Democrat support. That's what we hope will happen. Funding the government, particularly our military, our Veterans Affairs, are always important, but particularly now with so many threats that we face globally, this is certainly an important priority for the administration, and we hope something that will be discussed and agreed to later today. Jennifer?
On the fires, I'm sorry.
Sorry, on the fires, was there a specific question?
Yeah, is the White House in coordination with the folks out in California in battling that wildfire? Is there more money to be made available, especially for the areas near Los Angeles, which are under siege right now by so many devastating fires?
Absolutely. The administration is staying in regular contact. Both FEMA and folks here at the White House are speaking regularly to state and local authorities and making sure that we're ready and able to help when needed and when requested by those authorities. Jennifer?
Can you say a little bit about why John Bolton was here at the White House today, and also on taxes? We're a little confused on whether the White House would support a 22% corporate tax rate. You had the White House economist Kevin Hassett talking about saying it would be okay and it wouldn't undermine the economy. And then a few hours later, the legislative affairs director, Mark Short, said something about it needs to be 20. So can you say...
Look, our focus has been on getting the lowest corporate rate possible. 15 is better than 20, 20 is better than 22, and 22 is better than what we have. Again, we're going to continue to push, but we're not going to negotiate that from the podium. and we're committed to getting the lowest corporate rate we can. On John Bolton, he is here. He's a friend of the president, somebody who he wanted to visit with, nothing more than that, nothing more than a check-in and a friendly visit. John?
Sarah, Donald Trump Jr. refused to talk about his conversations with the president, citing attorney-client privilege. Would the president release him from any such privilege and allow him to speak to the committee?
That's a question you would have to ask his attorneys. We believe that his lawyers had a legitimate reason and basis for not answering those questions, but that's something I would direct you to his attorneys to address more fully.
Can you explain to me how it could be attorney-client privilege when neither Donald Trump Jr. nor President Trump are attorneys?
Again, that's something that you would have to talk with Don Jr.'s attorneys about. That's not something I'm going to be able to comment from here. Matthew?
Thanks, Sarah. Senator Franken today, in announcing his resignation, said, quote, that he's aware that there's some irony in the fact that I'm leaving while a man who has bragged on tape about his history of sexual assault sits in the Oval Office, and a man who has repeatedly preyed on young girls campaigns for the Senate with the full support of his party, end quote. What's the White House response to that?
Look, the president addressed the comments back during the campaign. We feel strongly that the people of this country also addressed that when they elected Donald Trump to be president, and I've addressed it several times from here and don't have anything new to add.
Can you say anything more broadly about the differences in the way the two parties are handling these accusations of sexual misconduct?
I think that some of that would be left to some of the party leadership. I'm not sure if there's a specific question in there on the differences, but John?
Thank you, Sarah. Have any of the president's counterparts from around the world contacted the president, contacted the White House to indicate that they too will follow the president's lead in moving their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, or acknowledging that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel?
I'm not aware of any country's commitment to follow suit in this at this time.
Do you expect that to happen? Do you expect that others will follow the president's lead here?
I'm not aware of any countries that we anticipate that happening at any point soon. I'm not saying that they aren't, but I'm not aware of them. Jordan?
Thanks, Sarah. Last week the president said that the U.S. would be imposing additional sanctions on North Korea today. Do you have an update on where that stands?
Yeah, we expect the Department of Treasury to put out more details on that, hopefully by the end of this week, and we'll keep you guys posted on that front. Jennifer?
Thanks, Sarah. What is the president's reaction to some U.S. allies, particularly in Europe, notably the United Kingdom, who have expressed opposition to his action recognizing Jerusalem? And also, does the fact that he kept his promise give him more credibility when negotiating in the Middle East?
Certainly, I think one of the abilities to follow through on something you've committed to, as the president has done. But also, let's not forget that this was something that Congress voted on starting back in 1995 and has reaffirmed 10 separate times over the last 20 years. This is something that the president took action on, a very courageous and bold action, and something that, frankly, the members of the United States Congress have voted on many times before.
Sarah.
Olivia?
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah, yesterday you guys put out a statement under the president's name saying that he was directing other officials in the administration to reach out to Saudi Arabia and urge them to immediately allow the flow of humanitarian supplies into Yemen. I have two questions about that. The first is, why isn't the president himself working the phones? And the second is, are there any consequences for Saudi Arabia if they don't immediately allow this flow of goods?
My understanding is the president did bring these up on previous conversations, and that I believe there are actions that are taking place for a port to open, and we'll keep you posted as those details become more available. Major?
On Monday.
Sorry?
Any consequences for Saudi if they don't do this?
As I just said, we have reason to believe that they're moving in that direction for a port to be open. We'll keep you posted. Major?
On Monday, when the president became aware that Michael Flynn lied to the FBI, you referred her to John Dowd. Those of us who've tried, John Dowd is not engaging on that. That's a knowable fact in this building. It's not a legal matter for the attorney to say. Can you just tell us when the president became aware of that?
You know, the attorneys feel differently, and they feel this is a question that should be answered by them, and I'll encourage them again to respond to you, but I'm going to have to refer you back to John Dowd again.
Why is it a legal question for them, not about something the president knew and when he knew it?
As I said before, John Decker's the only attorney in here. I'm going to listen to the attorneys on this one, and John Dowd, I hopefully will follow up with with you in short order. Mark, sorry, Major, I'm going to keep bouncing because
I
I'm
think
tight
you
on
want to take
time.
this one. It's real simple. It's very simple. Today, the UN ambassador said it's an open question whether the United States will participate in the Winter Olympics in South Korea. Is it an open question? Is that now in doubt?
Look, that wasn't exactly what the ambassador said. No official decision has been made on that, and we'll keep you guys posted as those decisions are made. Look, I know that the goal is to do so, but that'll be a decision made closer to time tomorrow. I think that's an interagency process, but I think ultimately the president would certainly weigh in. But again, that's something that he would take into account, probably a number of the stakeholders that would be involved. Absolutely, if we felt there was an issue, that would come up.
I just have two government funding questions. First, does he want S-chip reauthorized?
I haven't had that specific conversation with him, but I do know that we want to fully fund the government. Beyond that, I'm not going to get into any more details before their meeting today.
Okay. The bipartisan leadership is coming up in a much different atmosphere than the last meeting where he tweeted about how he didn't think a deal was possible because the Democrats were so bad on illegal immigrants pouring over the border. I'm wondering, has the president changed his mind about that? And also specifically, what was he referring to since in a government shutdown, ICE and the Border Patrol aren't effective?
The president's still very much committed to a strong border and to a border wall, and I would imagine that's discussed at some point today. I think we all hope a deal can be reached. We hope that the Democrats will be willing to put aside partisan politics and focus on fully funding the government. Josh.
On the Hill today, Chris Wray praised the FBI and said it was, the finest law enforcement force in the world. The president said, it's in tatters and it's at its worst place in history. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Look, we don't think that there is a discrepancy. We agree with Chris Wray that FBI field agents are appreciated and respected. The president's issues are with the political leaders in the FBI under former Director Comey, particularly those that played politics with the Hillary Clinton email probe, and we don't see a discrepancy beyond that. Blake?
When you undermine...
Sorry, I'm going to hop around because we're tight on time because we got to hold over here.
He undermines the FBI and says it's in tatters. Does the White House fear that, that could create ramifications, that people won't trust law enforcement, that people will say,
no, and again,
why should we interact with the FBI when it's in tatters?
No, and again, the president's referring to the political leaders at the FBI, particularly those that were involved in the Hillary Clinton probe. Blake.
Sarah, thank you. Two quick ones about government shutdown. Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor said today of the president, his party controls the Senate, the House, and the presidency, speaking of Republicans rather, and he said a shutdown would fall on his shoulders. How is that not just a reflection, an accurate reflection of the political realities that Republicans control Washington at this point?
Look, they may control Washington, but this still takes some Democrats to be engaged in the process, and we hope, frankly, that Democrats will play by the Schumer rule and not hold this bill hostage by playing partisan politics, and that they'll come to the table, help fund our defense department, help fund our military, help fund Veterans Affairs. John?
Clean CR. At some point, though, DACA is going to have to be brought up, or potentially be brought up. Is the White House willing to mix at one point a DACA fix with government spending, and if so, when would that be the case?
The president said that with DACA, he wants to make sure that we have responsible immigration reform, including a border wall and other things that we've laid out in those priorities and those principles, and that's something that would have to be part of that discussion. John?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. From that podium, Secretary Mnuchin and Gary Cohn both assured us that when a final tax reform bill is passed, the alternate minimum tax would disappear immediately. Now, of course, recent statements by the president, as the conference is about to begin, indicate it might not completely disappear, and if not immediately, certainly. Is the administration still committed to ending the AMT right away?
Look, I don't think our position has changed on that front at all, but at the same time, look, the conferees were just named. We want to let this thing work through its process. We've laid out our principles. We're very committed to those and making sure that the bill and the final piece of legislation delivers on that. Charlie?
A lot of attention on sexual misconduct and harassment by members of Congress. Is the president confident that Congress and its leaders can police and investigate themselves on this issue?
I think that we have no reason at this point to see otherwise, and hopefully that process will move forward. Hallie?
Sarah, I just have one question, but I need to clarify something that you had
said from the podium here on taxes. You said, I think to Matt on Tuesday, that as long as his taxes are under audit, he's not going to release them. His 2016 taxes, to our knowledge, are not under audit, unless they are. Can you
my understanding, and I will double check, but the president's taxes, no matter who the president is, actually immediately go under audit after being filed. So that's actually inaccurate.
Get back to us on
But I'll
that?
double check to be 100%
So my question to you more broadly is on this moment that we find ourselves in, frankly, of a national reckoning when it comes to sexual harassment. And so, again, a broad 30,000-foot way, does the president believe that he has a credible role in leading this conversation? And can you speak to the specific steps this White House has taken to make sure the women who work here feel like they are in a comfortable environment to talk about these things?
I think that the president treats, certainly as a woman myself, I've never felt anything but treated with the highest level of respect and been empowered to do my job. And I think that that's what I've seen the president do day in and day out since we've been here and during the campaign. And so I think that's a pretty good start and a pretty good example on that front.
Places are having sessions, they're having seminars. Are you guys doing that here? Are you talking about, in recent days, what people in this work environment can do? Are you taking
There are certainly White House policies that we are reminded of, and I think all of us expect each person to live up and to meet those policies and to not cross a line that is not only not legal, but not appropriate or not ethical. Kristen.
Just to follow up, we've seen Democrats forcefully call for John Conyers' resignation, Al Franken's resignation, which happened today. Do Republicans and does this president risk losing their moral authority on this issue, which is a huge issue right now, by endorsing a candidate like Roy Moore, which has now been backed by the RNC as well?
Look, I've addressed this in depth. We think that the allegations are troubling and that ultimately this is something that the people of Alabama should decide. Steve?
Why not call for him to drop out of the race or a writing candidate?
Was
the president failing to lead at this
Hey, Kristen, I'm going to move around here.
But just a quick follow. Is he failing
Was
to
the
lead on
president's
this issue?
proclamation on Jerusalem delayed because of concerns expressed by the Secretaries of Defense and State about security, that they wanted to get adequate security in place for U.S. embassies around the world?
We wanted to make sure that we had a thoughtful and responsible process, and that the decision and the components of that decision went through the full interagency process. And once that was completed, the president moved forward and took action. Steve?
The Palestinians are under the impression that the president pulled out of the peace process yesterday based on the Jerusalem decision. How do you correct that, or did he do that?
No. In fact, in the president's remarks, he said that we are as committed to the peace process as ever, and we want to continue to push forward in those conversations and those discussions. And hopefully, the ultimate goal, I think, of all those parties is to reach a peace deal, and that's something that the United States is very much committed to. We'll take one more. David?
Sarah, thank you. Given the recent revelations that at least one prosecutor on Robert Mueller's team was sending anti-Trump texts to another DOJ lawyer, and given the revelation that yet another one was congratulating Sally Yates for refusing to uphold and defend the president's travel ban, Chairman Goodlatte at the hearing this morning said that even the appearance of impropriety would devastate the FBI's reputation. So the question is, does the White House believe that the fix was in, that Robert Mueller's probe was biased from the beginning?
Look, we are fully cooperating through this process. We're going to continue to do so. As I said a few minutes ago, we certainly felt like some of the political leadership at the FBI was problematic. We're glad that Director Wray is there. We feel like he's going to clean up some of the messes left behind by his predecessor, and we look forward to this concluding soon and showing what we've been saying all along, that there was nothing to see here and certainly no collusion. The president's got an event here in a couple minutes. Just a couple of last minute notes. The president's got a event here with members of the Pearl Harbor survivors, and then we'll also have a pool spray at the top of the congressional meeting this afternoon at 3 o'clock. So we'll see you guys shortly.
All
right, Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, wrapping up a nearly 20-minute
I'll break
briefing.
the rules and I'll come
Let's
back.
see
I
what
know
else
that
she
there were a
says.
lot of questions on that. Frankly, pretty ridiculous questions. The president's throat was dry, nothing more than that. He does have a physical scheduled for the first part of next year. The full physical that most presidents go through, that'll take place at Walter Reed, and those records will be released by the doctor following that taking place. Thanks so much, guys.
All right, that final question, Gloria Borger, on the president seemingly stumbling on some words at the end of his 11-minute speech on Jerusalem yesterday.
Yeah, he seemed to be slurring his words a little bit, and there were all kinds of conjecture. Was it his dentures? What was it? But she said it was because he needed some water, and he didn't get some water.
We don't know for sure he has dentures.
We have no idea.
No.
We have absolutely no idea.
But it did cause some interest. Anything jump out at you, AB?
Yeah, I think that as Republicans in Congress have to worry about whether or not there is a plan, in the White House to eventually try to overthrow Robert Mueller as special counsel, you have to listen to the comments she made today about the political leadership of the FBI. That includes, obviously, Bob Mueller. It includes Andrew McCabe, obviously Comey at the time. But they're making very clear that they still have issues with the FBI.
We're going to have a lot more on this, but the press secretary is saying that she doesn't see a discrepancy in what Christopher Wray said today, praising the FBI, and the president tweeting the other day the FBI was in tatters. Let's continue our special coverage. Brooke Baldwin is joining us right now. Brooke.